Despite having just brought on Luke Ross as Scion's new ongoing penciler, issue 42 actually features a very different artist, Sergio Cariello. Cariello has worked all over the comics industry, for Marvel, DC, Dynamite Entertainment, and even David C. Cook Publishing. Within that career, he's drawn characters such as Batman, Captain America, Wonder Woman, Daredevil, The Flash, The Lone Ranger, The Bible. Yeah, you heard me, The Bible. And a few books for CrossGen, including Scion. He has a very naturalistic style favoring rounded line work. All of his characters look pretty fleshy and meaty. In a good panel, this is great, as his characters feel real and like they have weight to them. In a bad panel, his forms can look lumpy, like mashed potatoes, or like they're just missing details. I do think that he is actually a good fit for a fantasy book like Scion, and when he's got his focus on Ethan or another character's face, it can be incredibly good looking. I'm not sure why we don't have Luke Ross on this issue, though, and we won't have him next issue either. We are very close to the end of CrossGen's life cycle, so it's possible that Ross had just moved on at this point. It's a real shame, as I think that his artwork was a great fit for Scion, but let's see how our new man Cariello does. Cariello is joined by Matt Ryan on inks and Jason Eth on colors, and we rejoin the war against Tigris on the Sanctuary Isle. Ethan and his forces are still battling, having now backed up to the outskirts of the city. Damage has been done. There are burned buildings, others have collapsed, and plumes of smoke rise into the air. Our heroes continue to fight, and the churned up ground is littered with bodies, both metallic and flesh. Ashley slices through Nadia, but another one is right behind her. She shouts to Ethan that they can't keep doing this. They need to pull back farther. But Ethan isn't thrilled with that idea. They've been surrendering ground ever since the beach, and he doesn't want to give up anymore. They can't let the city fall. Skink touches Ethan's sword arm, stopping him for a moment. Ethan. It already has. We cannot win this. Exeter, still fighting, agrees. There are ways to win this war, but it won't be here, and it won't be like this. Reluctantly, Ethan agrees to pull back, but this is the last time that he shows his back to the enemy. He raises his sword, shouting for his troops to follow him. Before they can move, though, one of the tank-treaded Tigrisian warriors blasts a clock tower. The structure falls over, and it cuts off Ethan's troops from the city. They turn around facing an army of robotic enemies. Ethan sneers. So be it. They stand, and they fight! Nadia anyways, leads the charge against them, ordering their forces to destroy them all. But the battle is interrupted by a loud, guttural scream, one that shouts Ethan's name. From over the remains of the clock tower, a beefy squad of war apes jumps into the fight. Fresh, strong, and trained for this kind of work, they dive into the enemy and push them back. Ethan looks at his companions. Still want to run? Exeter answers with a smile. And miss all this fun? Together with Ashley, they charge back in, intending on leaving none alive. After some time and things are safe enough, Ethan approaches one of the war apes, welcoming them heartily. The warrior explains that they heard of Tigris' desire for the island, and they knew that they had to come help. After all, Ethan was the one who showed them the way. He holds out a hand, and returns Ethan's compass to him. Then he holds up a Nadia head. It's one thing to be a servant to a human, but to bend a knee to a machine? Not far away, Exeter watches this exchange with Ashley. He refers to the war apes as Janissaries, a term used in our world to refer to an elite infantry unit in the Ottoman Sultanate. Exeter knows of them, and says that Ethan keeps dangerous allies. Ashley relates how Ethan met them, stating that they encountered them when searching for Ethan's father. And this is our first writing mistake of the issue. Ashley was not present for that search. She had stayed behind on Sanctuary Isle for that little adventure. But, in any case, the basic point remains. Ethan has won their alliance by offering them something that they never had before. Hope. We return to Ethan's conversation, and he apologizes for Sanctuary not being as peaceful as he sold it. But the war ape, who we will learn is named Korak, shrugs at this. Freedom that isn't fought for has no value. Well, they have plenty of fight to go around, Ethan says. With a few more warriors like these Janissaries, though, they might actually be able to make a difference. Korak smiles coyly. How many more? My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 18.24 of Scion, The War's End. Author Ian Eddington throws us right back into the thick of things, but without ignoring our last story beat, meaning the retreat from the beach. It clearly hasn't gone well for our cast, as Ethan is tired and angry, and frustrated at the ongoing loss. It is one thing to retreat and then reinforce and get to fight back. It's another to do that, and lose, and retreat, and reinforce, and lose, and retreat, and reinforce again. Thankfully, our main crew is still standing, and not gifted with a magical sigil. They are much more practical in their thinking. I really like this distinction, as Ethan could really keep on fighting for quite some time. His sigil has healed life-threatening wounds before. The only real question at this point is how much damage can he withstand before he finally dies. Having the Janissaries show up as a surprise unit really threw me and surprised me, largely because I thought they were already on the island. After Ethan's return to the Sanctuary Isle in issue 39, we saw a war ape on the island. Like, that was clearly a gorilla in armor. You can't fool me, Ian Eddington. But apparently that was a different war ape, as the ones here are clearly the same ones that Ethan met back in issue 38. After all, they returned the compass back to him, so this has to be them. My confusion could stem from bad writing, as maybe the writer requested a war ape in that crowd, or it could be a bad drawing, as maybe the artist wanted to include a war ape with no foreknowledge of the plan to use them here, and maybe the writer just asked for a crowd scene, so they just filled it in. Or, I suppose it is possible that a lone war ape just chose to go to the Sanctuary Isle on their own, and that's who we saw. There are some very solid panels in these few pages. Again, Cariello does great work when doing close-ups. The final two panels here with Ethan and Korak are realistic and expressive and just incredibly well rendered. There's also a pretty great freaky moment where we see a Nadia charging at the camera, but some of her artificial flesh has been torn from her face, leaving one eye exposed and bulging. She actually looks really intimidating here. It hits home the horrors of having to fight a robot army, and it has a nice body horror element to it. The main thing that I dig in this part of the story, though, is our complete lack of a recap. Ethan doesn't give a monologue about the war with Tigris, or the weight of responsibility, or anything. Read the story thus far page on the inside cover if you're interested. We have robots to fight! I love it. Having caught up with Ethan and his crew, Eddington moves us over to the Heron Lands, where we find Prince Kai and Princess Elena. Despite crashing into the palace last issue, they are now in the city surrounding it, dodging Tigris units as they make their way to the palace and their parents. Elena suggests that they use the old secret passageways that they used to play in as children. Does Kai remember that? He scoffs. He remembers getting lost in the dark, and Elena finding him crying like a child. Is that why he still sleeps with the light on? Elena teases. Kai smiles, and his sister does as well. There we go. She thought that he had forgotten how to smile. These days are dark, yes, but they'll pass. The pair then move on. You want to see me smile? Kai asks. Let's drive these machines from our shore, then I'll grin like a fool all day. Inside the Heron Palace, we find King Dane and Queen Mariella at a window, staring out at the conflict. Their children are out there somewhere, Dane says, and I'm standing here doing nothing. Mariella assures him that he is doing what he can here. The people draw strength from his continued rule, now more than ever. Dane looks into her eyes. as he draws strength from his queen. A resounding explosion shakes the palace. Dust rains down from the ceiling, and Dane looks about in surprise. He asks what's happening, and Mariella reports that the siege wall must have been breached. Another explosion hits closer, blasting in the wall of the room. An assorted unit of Nadia and warrior bots stand in the new opening, their weapons pointed at the royal couple. A Nadia unit commands Dane to yield his lands, titles, and dominion to Tigris. Even this amnesic version of Dane isn't interested. He tells her never, and Nadia smiles. What makes you think you have a choice? Mariella suddenly leaps to her feet, a glowing blue blade in her hands. She warns Nadia to get back. She is of warrior stock, a sword maiden of the High King's Albion, and she does not fear her. Nadia casually gestures at the warriors. They don't need the woman, only the king. Kill her. They open fire on Mariella, but true to her lineage, she manages to dodge the opening blasts. She cleaves one of the robots in two, stabs another, and then tricks a third unit into blasting a fourth.
No swearing.
Yes, queen! Get it! Mariella then hacks off a robot arm and then shouts at Dane, Go! The secret passage is... A laser blast cuts through Mariella. The Nadia unit sneers. No one is leaving, save for Mariella, only as a corpse. Dane rushes to her fallen body, but it's too late. She's already gone. He reaches for her sword, promising to avenge her, but one of Nadia's booted feet drops on his hand. No, Nadia says, he won't be. Then she leans forward, and Nadia attaches a small device to the back of Dane's neck. His pupils shrink and his body stiffens as the device takes control of his mind. Now it isn't just the Heron Nation that belongs to Tigris, but the mind of its king as well. Nadia orders Dane to return to the flagship with her, and he stands, replying with just a yes. Behind Dane, having seen all of this from the secret passageway hidden behind a painting, are Kai and Elena. Tears run down Elena's face, and naturally Kai doesn't want to let Tigris get away with this. But Elena won't let him risk combat. With her mother dead and father captured, he is now king. If he is killed or captured here, then the Heron Nation has no hope. He has to do this smart, and so they let the forces of Tigris leave. Once again, we see some of the deft maneuvering that Eddington is capable of as a writer, paired with some slight mishandling of the story details. Kai and Elena being in the town surrounding the palace annoys me. Like, we had an overhead shot of the palace and the land surrounding it in issue 39. We know what this area looks like. Issue 41 showed us the royal heirs fighting outside of the palace and then crashing back into the palace. For them to be suddenly placed inside of the city is just bad writing, and it indicates a lack of detail somewhere. It is totally possible that in the script for issue 41, Eddington just called for the heirs to smash into a tower, and that was all, no further information provided. Given that the heirs were defending the palace at the time, Ross would have then had them crash into the palace. That makes sense. But if Eddington wanted them in the city, why wouldn't he ask for that? The scene with Elena falling lasted long enough that you could rebuild those pages to show them careening towards the city easily. If the plan was always to have them crash there, they could have done it. That said, placing them in the city is a smart move now that we know where the story is going. If Kai and Elena were present in the palace with their parents, the odds of the Heron royal family fighting back and winning go up. And honestly, maybe them dying go up as well. The best way for Dane to get mind-controlled is to strip him of his defenders and leave him vulnerable. This also has the added bonus of making our story reliant on Dane and his willpower to resist or fight Tigris's control. And we know that Dane isn't the man he used to be. He already tried to give up the crown once before. Without the support of Mariella and the kids, does this version of Dane believe in his leadership enough to fight through this? We just don't know. And those are some pretty great stakes for this war moving forward. Putting Elena and Kai outside in the city allows Tigris to get to the palace first and do their dirty work, leaving the siblings as unwilling watchers who just arrived too late. I do have super mixed feelings over Mariella's death here. Obviously it is tragic, and obviously it is badass to see her challenge Tigris and hold her ground, if only for a time. Mariella was kicking ass there, and for a character who has spent the series being emotionally strong, it is great to see that strength and skill represented physically. The "I am a sword maiden" line definitely feels like a callback to Arwen from The Lord of the Rings, who was a shield maiden herself. Mariella saying that she is descended from the High Kings of Albion is more of a real-world callback. Albion is the earliest recorded name that the Romans and Greeks used for England, believed to be a reference to the White Walls of Dover. Albion has gone on to be used in fictionalized versions of England throughout pop media, so Mariella is defending this idea that her line traces back centuries, that there is weight and honor behind it, and that this is what motivates her to fight. That memory, that sense of history, is only hinted at here, but it is so important because Dane has no history right now. Why should he fight this hard when he has nothing that he could remember anyways to fight for?
Them's some good stakes.
That said, I hate seeing Mariella go. Out of the two parents, I have liked her the most, and her more emotionally aware, hopeful, loving nature. She has done more to hold this family together and keep the Heron Nation safe than Dane certainly has recently, so this just sucks. And while Scion does have some pretty badass ladies, specifically Ashley and Elena, I'm always happy to have another. Especially since Mariella is older than the other two, so her character challenges age-based stereotypes, showcasing an older person as capable in combat. The Elena and Kai stuff throughout these two scenes is pretty strong. I feel like Eddington really gets these two. Faced with potentially ruling the nation, Kai's reckless nature pushes him into wanting to take maybe some dumb risks. Like challenging the Tigrisian forces instead of sneaking into the castle or rescuing their father after being mind-controlled. Elena demonstrates the cool manner and understanding of her mother, that they need to fight smart, not recklessly. But she doesn't do so carelessly, making sure to tease a smile from Kai. Things are bad right now. She's not lying to herself. She will face those things, but she also has an eye on the future. And things won't always be bad. That's what they're fighting for, and they can't lose sight of it now. Solid work with these two.
Despite that praise,
why, oh why, did Tigris not use mind control sooner? They had Ethan and Ashley unconscious and in their custody. Why not try to put chips on them then? Or during Nadia's whole time with Ethan? And don't try to argue with me that maybe Tigris hadn't developed the technology at that point. They have been planning this attack for years, readying their forces, building an army, sending out scouts. They wouldn't have done that with some half-baked, not ready yet mind control chips-based plan. That would be silly and stupid. No, this isn't a Tigris problem. This is an author problem. Tigris couldn't use mind control chips before this story because the author hadn't invented them yet. I won't lie, I had been vaguely thinking that maybe the broad strokes narrative of this war had been planned out by ex-author Ron Mars before he left the title, and maybe Eddington was just coming in and building on those bones, fleshing them out. But if Mars had been planning to use these chips, I think that he would have seeded the idea of them earlier in the series, or at least hinted at them. No one was worse about keeping a plot element hidden in Scion than Mars was, and so I find it unlikely that he planned to use these. Eddington, however, coming onto the book and having to write this war fresh, completely from the ground up, has to make things up pretty fast in order to close out the story. And so, we get mind control chips. I could rant all day about better uses for the chips, or a neat way to work them into our older bits of narrative, or even point out the inherent irony of having robots fighting to spread equality and coexistence, but doing so by enslaving others and reducing them to little more than biological machines. But I won't, because it's clear to me that this was not part of Scion's larger overall narrative. This is Eddington's specific story element, so we can't retcon Mars's run to include these chips. That run has happened, and it is over. We have to live with what we got. Having now had our hearts utterly broken by the death of Mariella, we return to the Sanctuary Isle. Korak is leading Ethan and his band through a forest. Exeter asks how Korak's forces got here without being detected, and the gorilla snorts. They went undetected because that's what they were made to do. They traveled at night, though, he explains, and landed on the forested shore to cover their arrival. Exeter is impressed, and he tells Korak so, and Korak thanks the big man for the compliment. They have heard stories about Exeter, and he sounds like a fine warrior.
Look at these bros over here, broing out. I love it.
Ethan interrupts the brofest. So how many warriors did you bring? Korak parts the foliage before them, giving Ethan his first clear look. Why, all of them. When we turn the page, we have a 2-page spread of dozens of war apes and monkeys. They're not just gorillas either, but also chimpanzees and baboons. One of them shouts that Korak has returned. Korak says that this is just one of their encampments. There are more scattered throughout the forests, for a total of 3,000 warriors. All of them are skilled and loyal only to Ethan. Our boy turns to his friends, excited about this, but Ashley still looks pensive. When asked what's wrong, she says that even with these numbers, even with 10 times these numbers, there's still no threat to Tigris. If they only fight using swords and spears, sure, Ethan agrees. But they have more than that. It takes Ashley a second to realize what he means, but when she does, Ashley blanches. Ethan, you can't mean those hidden weapons. They were hidden for a reason. And he knows that, he really does. But they need to find a way to end this war, whatever means necessary. I work pretty hard to stay impartial during these breakdowns. Or if something does bother me personally, as opposed to critically, I at least try to make sure that I point that out. Just because something bothers me doesn't mean that it is going to bother you, dear listener. People are different, and we have different tastes, and that's okay. So it is totally a me thing when I say that I
No swearing.
hate monkeys, and I hate that is our big savior backup force. There's no other reason than that. I just don't like monkeys. So that said, I love seeing Ethan's gesture of goodwill to the war apes being reciprocated. It is a great use of continuity and a fulfillment of the Sanctuary Isle's goal, to give everyone a place to live, even those who were made as weapons. This is one of those moves that make Avalon feel real, and like other stories matter outside of Ethan, but then it still ties back into our narrative pretty seamlessly. It's touching, it's hopeful, man, I dig it. But then we have Ashley knocking the wind from our sails. Even with this additional force, the Isle can't stand against Tigris forever, especially if they take the other 2 nations. This just won't be enough. And hey, secretly, I hate that Ashley is the one to point this out. Ashley has been the positive, encouraging force in Scion for a minute now, while Ethan is practical and maybe a little bit mopey. This is kind of the crux of their relationship. Ashley believes in a better world, and Ethan is the one who fights for it. So having Ashley doubt their inevitable success just reads as wrong for me. But Eddington also knows that Ethan is our star, and our star is the one who has to have the plan, so Ethan pitched his plan. And it's forbidden weapons. This is another smart use of continuity. Again, I love it. I brought up in issue 39 that Mars was providing weapons for the Isle's defense before he booked it, and now Eddington picks up on that like he picked up on so much else. That's good writing. Our final issue, issue 43, brings with it yet another artistic change. While we do have a cover by Luke Ross, this issue was drawn by Fabrizio Fiorentino. If you had been buying all of CrossGen's output to this point, then you, dear reader, would have seen Fiorentino's artwork before, way back in the beginning of things, with CrossGen Chronicles issue 1. His artwork harkens to the statues and figure works done by Greco-Roman artists, carefully posed and brightly lit. He uses a lot of heavy darks in order to highlight or emphasize the figure of the characters. The men are all well-built and handsome, the women are thin and voluptuous. He has a habit of drawing a lot of detail on character lips, which just always weirds me out. Normally, his artwork isn't to my tastes, but I have to admit that his sense of world design and costuming feels right for Scion. Paired with inker Jennifer Cross, who we've seen before in Scion, and colorist Andrew Crossley, this is an odd, yet good-looking book for me. I don't think I would want to see Fiorentino full-time on a comic book, but I don't think that he's a bad fit for this one. I do think he's a better fit than Cariello, though. We jump forward in time a bit, opening issue 43 with Khanate Minda on her flagship, flanked by King Dane and Braun.
Oh, this motherfucker
No swearing.
is back!
Jesus save me. Anyways, Minda is being broadcast to the known world, announcing that a new peace has been built by the world leaders. The kings have agreed to serve Tigris, although they shall continue to rule their respective lands. Dane steps forward and looks into the camera. This war with Tigris has opened their eyes to the horror of war. Too long have the two nations spent lives pointlessly. Now they shall have peace and prosperity, even if it means giving up their freedom. Dane turns to Braun, who agrees. Well said, Your Highness. They shake hands, their shoulders clapped by the Khanate. In the Heron capital, watched by Tigris soldiers, we see the people watching this. Among them, hidden in cloaks, are Elena and Kai. Naturally, they are horrified to see this broadcast. Their father, controlled by Tigris, allied once again with Braun. He was probably only too eager to turn his people over to Tigris, so long as it meant he got to be king again. He is adept at using people, Kai grumbles, and then he apologizes to his sister, remembering her ordeal. He apologizes, but she's okay. Elena has often thought the same of Braun. The broadcast is suddenly interrupted by an explosion. Lasers fired from personal aircraft detonate against the flagship. Kai's eyes light up. It can't be.
But it is, baby!
Ethan, Ashley, Exeter, and more forces from the Sanctuary Isle fly through the air on skybikes.
For Avalon! Ethan shouts. For freedom!
They continue to shoot, blasting as many of the ships as they can. Great plumes of fire fill the air as they dance through the sky. The shock buys them a moment. Ethan orders Korak to gather their forces and target the troop ships and fighter carriers. He and Ashley are going to visit the Khanate. Speaking of, Minda is outraged. With no ready air support, they're just floating targets out here. The Sanctuary Isle had no such weapons before. Where did they get them? A Nadia unit asks for orders, and the Khanate orders her to recall the fleet, meaning those triangle ships that attacked the Heron and Raven nations. In the Raven Nation, we find the true king, Court, going over resources and troop strength reports with his military commanders. They aren't happy about their situation, having fallen back to a hidden garrison, but will have to do, Court says. It's all that they have. Good news lifts their spirits, though. The airships leave the Raven capital, having been summoned back to the fleet. A communication expert relays the news about the peace and Ethan's attack, and Court gets excited. This is their chance. With their ground forces abandoned, they can now push Tigris out of the city. They can finally fight back. The news isn't all good, though. The officer adds that according to the broadcast, the Raven Nation has actually surrendered to Tigris. General Riga is outraged. None but the king may surrender for them. And so the officer passes on the news that King Braun spoke for the Ravens. And Court is like, what? Yeah, man, I hear you. I ain't happy about this either. In the Heron Lands, we see Kai and Elena beginning to fight back as well, rallying their countrymen to do the same. They do, and just as in the Ravenlands, the aerial support flies away. This is great news for them. But Kai can't help but worry about his brother. Which is surprisingly sweet. This isn't even in the script. It just occurred to me that Kai is actually worried about Ethan. Aw. Naturally, this sends us back to the battlefront. Nice scene transitions, Eddington. I love how effortlessly this all flows. So we return to the Sanctuary Isle, where we find Skink at the castle that we saw back in issue 39. Where they found all the hidden cache of weapons. Over a headset piece, Ethan asks Skink if he has things ready, and Skink reports that he does. But is Ethan sure about this? Ethan replies that they don't have much of a choice. Skink reports multiple signals approaching Ethan, the Tigris air fleet. They're closing in fast, only 12 minutes to intercept. Ethan orders Skink to do it, and the former jester prays that Ethan knows what he's doing. He presses down on a button, one with the image of a missile on it. Outside, one of the castle's towers begins to shake and rumble. The copper roof separates into 4 triangles and peels back, revealing a missile head. The stone of the structure falls away as well, exposing the metal framework holding the missile in place. It's ready to launch. At the flotilla, Korak reports that they have lost the element of surprise. From here on out, it's only a matter of time until Tigris' forces overwhelm them. Ethan replies that he understands, but they must hold Tigris here as long as possible. They can't risk the fleet diverting or leaving. Korak nods madly. Then they stay and stand to the last, to victory or to death. Elsewhere in the sky, Ethan leaps from his own skybike onto Ashley's. She berates his recklessness, but he just laughs. There are 1,000 ways for them to die today, but if he can get one last embrace from her, then they're worth it. And if that doesn't sound like Ethan, you're right, and Ashley picks up on that. What is wrong with you? Are you okay? Ethan asks for her forgiveness. In a few minutes, they're going to learn if he has saved their world or doomed it. What does that mean? Ashley is confused for a moment, but then she figures it out. The castle. He's used more weapons than just the skybikes, didn't he? He did what he needed to do, Ethan replies grimly. Over their shoulder, we see the 2 halves of the Tigris air fleet approaching. It's almost time. Ashley begs Ethan to turn away from this course. There has to be another way. Ethan wishes that there was. He calls Korak over the skybike's radio. All of their forces need to return to the island. They have 4 minutes. Korak understands. He'll see it done. Ethan now turns to Ashley. She needs to go too. She resists, willing to fight him to the very end. But she needs to live for him, for their child. Her eyes go wide. How does he know about that? Here, Ethan smiles. Fruit pudding and pickles for breakfast? His mother had similar tastes when she was pregnant with him. Now he tells her to go. With Ashley soon leaving, Tigris will think that they're retreating, and it'll buy him some time to finish the job. On Minda's flagship, the Khanate is celebrating her impending victory. She issues some orders to defend the fleet, and then run Ethan's forces down. She moves over to Dane, taunting him. "You've already lost your wife to this conflict, your majesty," she says, "and now you'll lose your son. Is freedom worth all this?" Ethan lands his skybike nearby, blasting away any present Nadia units. Minda orders Braun to stop Ethan, and he goes to do so, lifting his hand, which opens into some kind of blaster. This isn't Braun at all, but a robot simulacrum. He fires at Ethan, sure, but our boy has fought the real deal countless times, and this robot is no match. Ethan slices it clean in 2. And then he turns to finish off Minda, but he is fired upon by King Dane. Ethan is disappointed to see this robot using a mere hand weapon. Doesn't Minda have anything better to set against him? Oh, she does. Minda leans in next to Dane. This isn't some robot replacement. This is the real deal, Ethan. This is your father. She whispers into Dane's ear. Now finish it. Kill him. Kill him. The sweat beading on his brow, Dane suddenly cries out, "No!" And he tears at the chip on his neck. Freed, Dane quickly turns on Minda and shoots her. And not once, but again and again. "You killed my wife. You slaughtered my people. You would have me kill my own son? Burn in whatever hell spawned you, witch." The robotic form of Minda squeals and cries as it passes. Dane moves over to Ethan, begging for his forgiveness. Ethan's only concern is for his mother. Is it true? Is she dead? Dane confirms that it is true, adding that she died a warrior's death. He tries to get Ethan to move to seek medical attention, but he won't. It's too late. In the distance beyond them, a bright light is rising into the sky. A plume of smoke trails behind it. It's too late for medical attention, Ethan says. It's too late to do anything. Then, this is the end, Dane says, pulling his son close. But Ethan smiles. No. This is only the beginning. The missile strikes at the heart of the Tigrisian fleet, and an atomic blast consumes the horizon. The light from the explosion eventually fades, clearing from our eyes. Once we can see again, we are looking at a stone tablet. Carved upon it is just a name. Ethan Rex. A statue of Ethan rests above the plaque, clutching a downward-facing sword in his hands. We're inside of what looks like a cathedral or maybe a museum, and a woman's voice explains that Prince Ethan and Lord Skink, not yet a lord, of course, but he would get there, had altered the weapon used in the war. They had set it so that the fallout would be at a minimum, while the resulting electromagnetic pulse would kill the forces of Tigris. That was how the first Automata War was won. The teacher looks around at her students, a motley assortment of human and the lesser races. They're dressed in modern clothing, t-shirts, jeans, they've got backpacks on, that kind of thing. One of the kid asks if that's how King Ethan died, and another answers, He fought in the Second and Third Machine Wars, so he couldn't have died. Then he got crowned king, and all the really big stuff happened. Then how did he and his dad live? They were right there when the bomb went off. The teacher patiently says that is a story for another day. The camera moves up, framing a stained glass window that houses the birds of both nations, heron and raven. They are mirrored, looking like Earth's yin and yang symbol. Or Ethan's own sigil. The teacher's voice fades as we float up away from the building, asking the students to open their history books. They're going to begin studying Duke Exeter's Peace Gardens. Now, can anyone explain the significance of the avenue of trees that are planted there?
And yeah, Teach, I can.
A small narration box in the corner tells us that this is the final issue of Scion, but that Ethan's story continues on in another cross-gen story, the Negation War. But let's hold off on talking about the future yet. We still have this issue to break down. I didn't want to interrupt the overall flow of this issue, as it moves really quickly, and it is our ending, of course, so I wanted it to be satisfactory. Eddington maintains a good pace throughout this issue. He's constantly pushing forward, but he never forsakes the story of our various cast members. Ethan definitely comes across as the hero here, rallying his own troops, devising the plan to stop Tigris, confronting Khanate Minda. Personally, that stuff's great. Eddington's voice for Ethan is perhaps the most off it's been, though. Twice now, in our last 2 issues, he has said the line, quote, "The die is cast," end quote. And that is something that Ethan has never said before, and he has never been a fan of leaving things up to chance. I absolutely hate these 2 panels, but what can you do? Ethan also feels very, careless, reckless. During the final fight here, him leaping from his skybike to Ashley's for that last hug, his casual mention of her pregnancy, it all feels, It all feels like an action movie. Previous battles in Scion have always read as pretty serious. The battle at Point Corday, Ethan attacking Braun at the Raven Keep, the Ravens' surprise attack at the Felguard Notch. Scion traditionally treated war as a somber, terrible event. I've recently been rewatching the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the tone for these fights normally feels like the fights in those movies. Very serious, very grim. This story, though, feels like it's just another adventure. This Braun being a robot is a great surprise, though. Like, that is a nicely done fake-out, Eddington. I initially thought that it was frustrating that Braun would be freed from Cranemere, and then he would ally with Tigris, or be chipped into allying like Dane, maybe, and yet we wouldn't get to see him challenge that fate. As sick as I am of seeing Braun as an antagonist, I find it highly unlikely that he would take a knee to Tigris. At least, not without planning to betray them, at the very least. But swapping Braun for a robot makes sense, especially if Tigris knew that Braun was king when they were making their plans, and so they made the robot to replace him. But then Court's return to the throne was so sudden and unexpected that they weren't prepared for it. Why they didn't just have the same plan but for Dane and Mariella, though, I do not know. Replacing either of them with a robot seems way easier than mind controlling him, but here we are. Ethan's solution to the war is pretty neat. Too neat, if you ask me, but it has to be. Eddington has only one issue left to end this war and close out this series. So we get a nuclear bomb with no fallout, but it can at least stop the invasion. My biggest complaint about this, aside from its utter plot convenience, is that our previous issues have treated the weapon cache as too dangerous, that no one should use those weapons because they would cause too much harm. So to have Ethan then used one, but have it cost him nothing and gain him everything, it's just too easy for me. The trick with that is that most of these missiles are 200 years old, so I suppose that the technology of Avalon would have progressed enough that maybe you could render the radiation harmless while still creating the EMP effect. And, to be fair, Ethan was clever enough to lure all of the Tigrisian forces into one area, far removed from the rest of the world, in order to destroy them and minimize any harm from that weapon. There is some good thought to this strategy, it feels rushed and it's too easy, and Ron Mars never gave Ethan a clean win during his run. Every victory that Ethan earned was paid for by some kind of tragedy, so it is strange to have him just win here without losing anything at all. But then I have to admit, it's kind of nice that the last fight that we see Ethan in is one that he wins utterly. Our glimpse of future here at the end is a frustratingly nice little storytelling cheat. We get to learn that Ethan's attack worked, and that he survived, and that things got better, without committing any time or effort in order to show us the work to get there. Eddington's vision of Ethan matches Mars from issue 39 for the most part. He has the long hair, he's got the goatee, he's got the scarred left eye. So Eddington is adding some detail to Mars's prediction without contradicting it. I really liked the mixed symbol of both houses here. That was a detail that didn't show up in Mars's future prediction, but it's really cute. In Mars's vision, I assumed the image that we were shown was on the Sanctuary Isle, because, that was what Ethan was king of. But by showing us this symbol here, Eddington is telling us that the two nations are now united, and that they venerate Ethan. So it seems like Ethan's actions and continued battles ultimately earn him a position as king of both nations. And they also earn titles for Skink and Exeter, which is dope. But we have no mention of Ashley, which is frustrating. Ethan's overall story without Ashley would be completely different, but no, not even a mention. Just leave her out of the history books, unless she pops out a baby, I guess. The avenue of trees that the teacher asks about, by the way, is a callback to the Heron tradition of planting trees when a member of the royal family dies. Given that it is within Exeter's Peace Garden, we can only guess why he in particular did it, but I would wager that he was honoring those who died in order to bring about peace. Or maybe to honor all of the lesser races who died fighting for it. It's a nice touch, and I super appreciate it though. It also indicates a deepening of respect and friendship between Ethan and Exeter, as we know that this is a tradition in Ethan's family, and we saw it at the Heron Palace. So it's quite likely that Ethan took Exeter back to the palace for something or other, and that's what led to him learning about this tradition. Despite only being able to write Scion for 4 issues, I think that Ian Eddington did a overall admirable job. There are a lot of callbacks to earlier Scion stories or story elements. He writes many of the characters well, and he kept a pretty brisk, fast-moving pace. The artwork towards the end of this particular issue gets looser, way less defined than it is at the beginning of the issue. I feel like there's even some pages at the end without any inking, although it could just be incredibly light inking. The pages still look good, but they feel unfinished, less polished than the rest of it. Having an ending, though, is still better than no ending at all, and many of CrossGen's titles just stopped, so I consider this ending a bit of a blessing. We have finally finished Scion, everybody. After 8 months of reading and writing a total of 44 issues, including CrossGen Chronicles Issue 2, we have reached the end. We've seen Ethan grow from a young man, unsure of his place in the world, to a noble hero, willing to risk his life in order to save others. He has saved lives, he has fought the forces of evil, and he's even turned a few enemies into allies. That's not a bad run. Next time, we will be closing out our exploration of Scion with a look back at the series as a whole. We're going to examine its themes, how well those themes were explored, or failed to be explored, and where and how Scion tied into the broader CrossGen universe. Join me in a week for episode 18.25 of Scion, Sum and Substance. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me, to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.